Hi, Amy.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
I'm really happy to have you here today. For those of you guys who don't know, this is my first time coming back to doing this podcast, and I figured that the best way to celebrate and commemorate this moment was to have my boss, or my old boss, on the show. And so, as many of you guys may or may not know, this is Colin Smith. He is our current county legislator for Peekskill, Yorktown, and Cortland, some parts of it. And today we're going to be discussing a lot of different topics from your childhood as well as the campaign that you just recently ran. And like I said, I'm really happy to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, and I feel honored to be the first of your guests coming back.
Well, thank you. So if you hear a dog barking in the background too, it's my dog. She's downstairs and you can still hear her, but that's okay. So let's start from the beginning a little bit. Let's go to your childhood. I'm going to sound like a therapist, but not trying to do it that way. But I'm really interested in a lot of your childhood as well, kind of what started you or what got you to this point. I know that you have biracial parents as well. And you have told me quite a couple of interesting stories from your youth. So tell me where you grew up and what that experience was like for you and your parents as well.
Sure. So it's my story starts in Peekskill, where I was born and raised. My parents, as you stated, are an interracial couple. They were married in the early 1970s, which was, not that long ago, but still long enough to be, sort of where there were still, developing attitudes towards, towards interracial couples. It was only 6 years after the Loving versus Virginia decision by the Supreme Court, which, as you know, banned any laws against interracial marriages. And so, but still, the climate was such that at the time when they got married in 1973, they found that it was a comfortable fit for them to move into the city of Peekskill, where it was, more accepted than the places where they both grew up.
So your mom is from Cortland, right? And then your dad is from where again?
Well, they're both from Cortland, actually. My mother grew up in the hamlet of Verplank, which is part of Cortland. And my father grew up in the village of Croton, which is also within the town of Cortland.
Which you now currently represent, right?
I represent the Verplank portion of Cortland, yes. And so, yeah, it is... It is
very full circle.
Things come full circle, absolutely. And growing up was, you're aware of what's going on, or you may be aware when you're younger. You may be aware of sort of how people are treating you, adults, in particular, but also other kids. But it isn't always, you don't have an understanding really of these types of dynamics. So
you feel it, but you don't really
quite
understand it.
Exactly. And I always knew that there were that there were reasons why parts of my family, particularly on my mother's side, were not friendly. They weren't close to her. We didn't go around them. My mother didn't bring us around them. And I knew it had to do with skin color. I knew it had to do with the fact that we weren't, white like my other cousins. So, it was, but they weren't, not everybody was like that. Just, a few were though. And so that is something that definitely, has an impact on who you are.
How do you think it shaped your perspective moving forward, kind of just viewing the world? Because I remember we had a conversation maybe a couple months ago regarding the fact that you come from a family that is, biracial. And so I think you had mentioned, you told me about, your childhood, your cousins defending you, kind of being there for you. But how did that really shape your perspective moving forward? How did some of those moments as a kid shape you moving forward?
Well, I gotta say, one of the ways in which it impacted me was it really contributed to what I would consider to be a low self-esteem, a poor self-image, because I think when, as a child, you know that other people, especially other adults, are looking down upon you for whatever the reason might be. It makes you think, well, there must be something wrong with me, because otherwise, why are they not accepting me? Why are they viewing me as different, as less than other people? And so that really is probably the primary way in which it impacts you. Is is very damaging to your sense of self and to your self-worth, because you just know that you're not going to be accepted fully in that world, in that environment. And there's nothing you can do about it, because there's nothing that you can do about it. So that certainly is one way. And because of that dynamic, it makes you look at people, certain people in particular, through a bit of a negative lens. It makes you very weary, or I should say very wary of people that look like the ones who ridiculed and put you down, and I think just sort of gives you a view of the world that this is how these people are. And these people, of course, I'm referring to my Caucasian relatives, the white side of my family.
Do you think there was a moment specifically, like a memory that you have, where it kind of clicked within you that you were different, or there was a reason why maybe your family or other people outside of your family that treated you a specific way? Like, do you remember having a moment inside of yourself thinking like, wait a minute, I think I'm actually slightly different?
I don't know that I don't know that there's there's one particular moment that I could point to that was like, oh, this was the first time that I realized. But I do recall one time going to my grandmother's house, and this is my mother's mother. We would have to go down to her house, or when my mother brought us down there to visit, it would have to be when my grandfather wasn't around, because he was not at all interested in the situation. He didn't speak to my mother for many, many years on account of the fact that she married a black man. And so we went down once, but my grandmother, on the other hand, when he wasn't around, she would be nice and give us food and stuff like that.
Shout out to all the grandmas for
Shout
being
out
sweet.
to Grandma, right? And Grandma Brennan, she was an amazing woman. But I remember one time we went down there and we walked into the kitchen, and I'm like being myself, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know how old I was, 8, 9 maybe. And there was some woman with her back to the entranceway to the kitchen, who I couldn't see. But as soon as I walked in, and I was like, hey, Grandma. And my grandmother turned around with this look in her eye, and she saw me, and she just was like, she gave me the "don't come in here, you got to go out."
Wow.
And I instantly knew the reason for that was whoever was sitting in that chair, but I didn't know who that was.
Right.
And the person never turned around. And so, I turned around and walked out, but I was, hurt, obviously. And later found out it was one of my, I don't know if it was one of her sisters or one of my grandfather's sisters, but somebody who, certainly would not have taken kindly to the fact that there were, there was a biracial child walking into the kitchen area there.
Wow. Very, very sad that had to happen for you. I'm interested in the portion where you said it gave you a sense of insecurity, because I'm sure many of us also suffer from insecurities for various reasons. But in this specific case, we're speaking about your identity. So, I'm really interested in, what do you mean, like, insecure? Like, what moving like moving throughout life? Like what does that look like? How do you think that played out?
Well, I think it played out in every aspect of my life. Feeling that, I should say, feeling or knowing rather that I would always be viewed as, as different. I would always be viewed by some people, not everybody.
Right.
But by some people who were, allegedly family, right? That I would be viewed as, sort of a second class or second rate individual, because of the fact that I was not white, not fully white.
Right.
But not fully white or not white is really the same, the same thing in the minds of these individuals. And it painted how I interacted with people, always feeling very very nervous, very scared, very tentative, not wanting to be seen or even noticed.
Wow.
A lot of the time, because I was afraid that if the attention were on me, that I would become the sort of the focal point of ridicule or criticism or hate.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate you opening up about this subject, really just about yourself, because it's not easy to always open up about your emotions, and sometimes it can be hard to process those things. So thank you for sharing that, all of that.
My pleasure.
I think it's kind of interesting that, at least for me, when we first met, you seemed to be very secure. So I'm sure that over time, you kind of grew into your sense of security. So I know you also went to law school. You graduated from Peekskill High School too, right?
That's right.
What year, if you don't mind us asking?
Oh, no, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just kidding. No, I am a 1991 graduate from Peekskill High School.
Just as a funny difference, I graduated in 2013. So I think when I was born, you were graduating law school, right?
What year were you born?
95.
College.
Okay, so you were like sort of on the way.
I was close.
Okay, so tell me about your education. How did you get to law school? What was that process like?
Well, law school, I didn't go right from college to law school.
Did you take like a year or two off, or how long?
I took about 3 years off.
Okay.
Between my undergraduate and law school.
Okay.
I wanted to work after I got out of college, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with a bachelor's in philosophy. So,
well, hold up. So before you keep going, because
Yeah.
I'm very interested in this. Me and Colin have had many philosophical conversations regarding life, anything. Why philosophy? You could have chosen poli-sci or maybe something else, but what intrigued you about philosophy?
It was not something I was ever interested in prior to my junior year of college. It was I took an intro to philosophy course and became basically hooked on studying philosophy.
Very cool.
That was pretty much how it happened. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. So then you majored in philosophy.
I majored in philosophy, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got out of college. So or what my next step was. So I spent a few years in between college, undergraduate, and law school, working different jobs. I was a flower delivery driver. I was a bank teller. I was a custodian. I was a shoe salesman.
I love it. I love to hear that.
A bunch of different things.
And you were how old around this time, do you think?
Well, this was in my mid-20s.
Okay.
So I was probably not
around my age.
Around your age, yeah.
26.
So I was 26 when I started law school.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
That's really, really interesting. So how was the transition between like out of school, like why law school It's the big question everyone says, why law school?
Why law school? Because I think like a lot of people, I thought it would be a prestigious job. People would, think, oh, wow, you're a lawyer. And I thought I was going to make, a killing, all this money when I, my first year out of law school. And of course, I heard these stories about people who went to law school and their first year out, they were making like 6 figures. And I was like, wow, like I got to do that, and that's definitely not what happened. But,
did you have a concentration in law school?
No, I didn't have a concentration. I went through, you kind of take a general, you don't really have, you can have a concentration, but, every JD programs are all, sort of the same. And then you can get, like a certificate or something in some area of law. But I didn't have any of that. My first job happened to be working for the district attorney's office in the Bronx. So
very cool.
Criminal law became part of my repertoire.
Very nice. Yeah. And how did you get that job?
I think because I had a friend who knew somebody. No, they had hired. They were the New York City district attorney's offices hire big classes every year, and so I just made I applied and I made it to the final round and was offered the position. So I was very happy with that. It was a great experience.
I can only imagine working for the DA is definitely a big deal, and in a big city, so that's an even bigger deal. I'm sure you encountered many very interesting cases.
Oh yeah, you could say that. A lot of interesting situations, a lot of interesting people. It was a good experience coming from a place like Peekskill, which is really a small town compared to, the likes of a place like New York City.
Absolutely.
So it was a learning experience.
Yeah, I could imagine. And where did you go to school?
I went to Pace Law School in
Law
White
School,
Plains.
right?
It's now Elizabeth Haub School of Law.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But,
well, very cool. So you went to the DA's office, and where did you go to next?
After that, I left and I did private practice. I've been in private practice ever since. Worked for a couple of different firms. I've done bankruptcy work. I've done insurance defense work. Done a lot of general practitioner type work. I've always done criminal defense as well. I worked for a couple of different firms between 2006 and I'd say 2014, and that's when I opened my own office.
Wow, nice. And so how old were you around the time that you opened your first practice?
Where are we? I was almost 40 years old.
Wow, okay.
When I opened my first
that's a great time to start practicing.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta, some people do it right out of school, right out of law school. I felt getting the experience through working for the government and then working in the private industry was very helpful.
So do you think it was worth it going to law school? Do you feel like that helped you later down the line?
Yeah.
Absolutely?
Yeah, absolutely. Because since I've been working on my own, I haven't had the need to really go back to working for somebody else. And that's kind of what I've always wanted.
Yeah, I think a lot of people...
Just to be independent.
Exactly. Have your own practice or have your own business or something. I'm sure that is something that was really helpful to you.
Yes.
And something that I'm sure a lot of people want to be doing. I know that I want to be able to do that at some point myself. So I think that's really cool. Well, you later went into politics, as we all know. And so I'm interested to hear how you got onto the Peekskill Education Board.
So that was kind of a I don't want to say a random decision, but it came from a conversation that I had with a friend of mine who was on the school board at the time, and had mentioned to me that there were some people who were leaving the school board and they were looking to find people to run for the position to fill it. And I asked the person, I was like, well, what are the qualifications to be a school board member? And, that was pretty much the last conversation I had.
Was that something you were...
That was on my radar?
Yeah.
No. Not
at all?
No. it wasn't on my radar. It was just something that I don't want to say I fell into, but had I not had that conversation, it's unlikely I would have been.
You would have gotten to this point.
Yeah, I don't think I would have. I mean, maybe at some other point something might have happened, but
right.
not at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what do people do on the school board? What's something you oversee? How does that, small little form of government work?
The school board is an autonomous body that sets policy for the school district and hires the superintendent and votes on the budget and, approves curriculum and things of that nature. They oversee the school district. And so as a school board member, those are the types of decisions that I was involved in for almost 6 years.
Wow. What were some of the highlights of your time on the school board?
Oh, gee.
If you could pick like two top moments.
I think, there was, there were a couple of instances where we really were, there was a high point, there was a high point and a low point. And I think that, the high point came, or one of the high point was when we were having an issue with busing. We had to reconfigure how busing was done throughout the district.
And for people who don't know what busing is.
Oh, for how your kids, whether or not your kids are eligible to get a bus to school.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it had been practiced for decades in the district that only a very small number of students were eligible for busing, and they were exclusively private school students. And the long and short of it was that was not something that we could maintain. It was not only was it not feasible, it wasn't even legal, we found. And so we had to come up with a new busing scheme, and one that was more equitable and fair. And that's what we did. And was not without its obstacles, because the parents of the private school students who had enjoyed this busing from the school district for years and years and years, all of a sudden found themselves no longer and that was a moment where I think the school board was really able to take a stand for the community and for the public schools as a whole, and really do something that we ultimately established a busing system that encompassed many of our public school students and some of our private school students, but was much more equitable.
Right.
And the other situation, actually, now I think about the other thing that comes to mind is not really a low point, or I don't want to talk about the low point, but when we had to fight the charter school that was attempting to locate itself in the city of Peekskill, and as a school board, we really led the charge on that fight, and we were able to successfully keep the Board of Regents from granting them a charter to set up shop in the city of Peekskill.
Was there a lot of pushback from parents and the community members?
There was a contingent of community members who were private school parents and who were still reeling from the loss of one of the larger private schools in the city that it shut down. It was a Catholic school. And so they were really looking for something to sort of take the place of that. And my position and the position of many others was that if you want your private school, you have to find private money to fund it, not public money. And we were able to successfully stop that effort. So
wow, very interesting. Yeah. I wonder what Peekskill would have been like if we had a charter school.
It's not to say that there's not a benefit to charter schools. It's just that we were of the opinion that the cost was too great and that the returns would not be worth it.
Okay, that makes sense. Considering the
money that it would siphon away from the from the public schools, as well as the students that they are able to select, basically.
Right, absolutely. Because I'm sure that it's not cheap to go to a private school.
Well, it's not cheap to go to a private school, but a charter school is based on like a lottery. It's supposed to be based on like a lottery selection, but I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but it ends up being, that they take the higher achieving students out of the district, and that has an impact on the performance of the district.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does on the students too, to feel like I don't qualify to go to the school. What that does to somebody's psyche as well, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Is not good either. Well, very interesting. I know that you also worked on getting the resource center open that we have here in Peekskill. That is from the school. So
the Family Resource Center.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I played sort of I would consider it to be what do you call it, a preliminary role, in that we agreed as a city, when I was on the city council, to sell this old firehouse building that they now use for the resource center to the school district at a heavily discounted price. It wasn't all that difficult to get the members of the Common Council on board with it, because most of them, for the most part, were in favor of it. But there were some objections to doing it that our legal department had, or maybe objections is a strong word. There were some concerns about how it would look if we sold this property at a heavily discounted rate to the school district and all this other stuff. I was, on the other side of it. I thought we should have sold it to the district for $1 and just, we're supporting our schools and our community. So to me, it was a no-brainer, and the district, under the leadership of very capable administrators and staff, have really used that to the district's advantage.
Yeah, we've actually been to a couple of events when I was working with you.
That's right.
That they did for the community. They seem very, very open to receiving anybody, really. So the fact that you were able to, even if it was a small portion, as you said, the fact that you were able to make that come to life is a big deal. So
it was they're all pieces, we're all part of that process along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Well, thank you for sharing that about your school board experience. So I know that you went on to be on the city council for Peekskill. I'm interested what that was like. How did you know that was your next step? If you did, and if you didn't, how did that come about? How did you decide, okay, I'm going to do this and step forward into the political world?
So that came, once you get, and I think this is true just about anywhere in politics, once you become an elected official somewhere, you become sort of a candidate for other things, at least in the minds of local, the local committees, the local political committees. So I was asked or tapped, however you want to say it, to run for the city council in 2017, and I agreed to do it. And at that point, I'd had 5 years as a school board member, so I was familiar with the process to some extent. I was familiar with a lot of the people that were already on the council, and so it was it was something that I agreed to do. And the year we ran, 2017, we had a really strong Democratic ticket. And we were able to clean sweep all of the Republicans from the city council.
So everybody on the city council at that time was a Republican.
No, it was a 4-3 Democratic majority, but we were able to get those 3 Republicans. And their 4 Republicans because they had to run a 4th person. We beat them, and it has been a Democratic, an entirely Democratic board
since then. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's been Democratic for this whole time, which I think is very interesting. Was Peekskill, for those who don't know, was Peekskill very Democratic prior to that, or was it more Republican leaning? We could talk all day about the history of Peekskill's politics, but
I think suffice it to say that although Peekskill has had a heavily democratically favored registration amongst its registered voters for many years, for some reason that was not reflected in its elected leadership until 2017. Well, there were times before that, but I think it's 2017 that that the Democratic majority in Peekskill was able to finally really elect a council, all of whom are council and mayor, all of whom are Democrats, and it seems unlikely that that's going to revert at any time, at least at any time in the near future. It just took a while to get to that point.
Get there.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I know, it seems like Peekskill has had a challenge getting a lot of Democrats in, for a while. And so the fact that it's at this point now is a good thing. I'm curious about, who you ran with, if you don't mind sharing who you ran with on that year.
When I ran in 2017, my running mates were Vanessa Agudelo and Ramon Fernandez. For the 3 of us were running for council seats, and Andre Rainey, who then was a council member, was running for the mayoral seat.
Okay.
And we won it was the first time for the 3 council candidates, and all 3 of us won, and Andre Rainey won the mayoral seat. And we won by the council candidates won by a pretty convincing margin. The mayoral race was a little closer, but we still won. So
wow, well, very nice. I know that. Well, that was definitely the first step to your political career. How much time did you spend on the city council before moving on to county legislator?
So I spent 2 years on the city council.
Okay.
And then, as we do every 2 years, the Democratic Committee wanted to put up a challenger for the county legislative seat.
And who was in that seat at the time? At
the time, it was held by a man named John Testa. He was a former Peekskill mayor, and he had been the county legislator in this district for, I think, 10 or 12 years, something like that. And every 2 years, we would run somebody against him, and he would run away with the vote every time.
Well, he was very well liked, right?
He was very well liked.
He was Republican.
He's
right?
a Republican. He was very well liked. He's still very well liked. He and I have always had a very good relationship. I've known him since I was in school when he was a shop teacher when I was in high school. Yeah.
A lot of full circle moments for you.
Well, if you live long enough, it will begin to happen.
I hope so. I hope so.
And oddly enough, the year I decided to run for county legislator, he was deciding to retire.
Wow.
And so it became an open seat.
Did you know that before announcing your candidacy, or
no?
It just happened that way.
It just happened that way.
Wow! Look at you.
It was. It was quite. It was a real lucky break for the Democrats.
Because no one had held that seat.
A Democrat had never won the legislative seat that I now hold prior to that. So it gave us a real opportunity to win, and we did. We won.
He threw his support behind you at some point too, right?
Well, I would say that he was not very supportive. He was not terribly supportive of my opponent, and that had more to do with the personal relationship between the two of them, which went back many years. And so it helped that he, that as the incumbent or, as the, previous legislator, that he was not out there actively campaigning against me.
Right. Made people think like, well, why not?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. It just, or people just weren't, coming out,
Right.
So,
and who did you run against?
One of the former mayors of Peekskill, a guy by the name of Frank Catalina. So.
And that was your second time, right? Or no, that was
my first time running for the county legislative seat.
Okay. So you ran
second time running against Frank Catalina's ticket, because he was the mayoral candidate that we ran against in 2017.
Okay,
and
very
he lost.
interesting. Right, that's true. Wow, because I remember that at the time too. That was actually one of the first times that I met Colin was, through the campaign, because the Peekskill Dems were also running their campaign.
Right.
And you happened to be there, asked you a lot of good questions too related to police accountability. I remember having a very vivid conversation with you, I think, in one of the campaign offices. And I had no idea who you were. I was like, I don't know what county legislator does. I was like, all I know is this guy seems like a good guy, and I feel like he should be there. And you had a lot of great things to say, and it was very interesting and new for me too. So I was happy to see that there were genuine people who were down to earth, who didn't let the power get to their head, kind of remain the same. And so that always kind of stuck out to me about you. So you ran and you won. You were very successful, right?
We won, yeah.
I remember that night. What was it like for you to go from city council to county ledge?
It was very exciting, and it was very satisfying. It was very gratifying to have, because we ran a really hard race, and happy to have satisfying that we won, and also knowing that we were the first to win that seat for the Democrats. And it's made I think it's made a big difference in terms of how the county interacts, or operates up here, in terms of resources and things of that nature. It's been good for Peekskill and Cortland and Yorktown.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it. I feel like Peekskill is definitely on the map more than it used to be. Yeah. I'm sure it was due to you, some of the work of your colleagues as well. So thank you for the work that you've done over the past couple of years on the city council and on county legislator. I know it's a very tough job. It's very mentally demanding. So applause to you for being able to keep up with all of that.
Thank you.
So tell me about your experience as a county legislator. What has that been like for you? And what was that transition like? We came in at a time where COVID hit, so that was a very, very big impact. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, that was, it is definitely an experience that is hard to quantify.
Absolutely.
Or really characterize in any particular way, because it was the excitement of the new position, and the new responsibilities, and going from just being sort of locally in one municipality or one area to all of a sudden all over the county, which is Westchester is a large county, not just size wise but population wise.
Yeah.
With big cities and big infrastructure, and then within 2 months of all of that excitement, everything was shut down because of COVID, and it was just it was kind of a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, wanting to really dig in and do the work, and on the other hand, having to contend with, a global pandemic, the likes of which we haven't seen in a century. So I feel like, my political, at least, as far as the county goes, my political upbringing was, I'm like a COVID kid.
Pretty much. I feel like, yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of time.
You too, because we were both in it together.
Yeah, we were in the office for like maybe 3 or 4 months, and then and then COVID happened and they shut everything down, and we were working from home for a while. And it wasn't until like way later that we were actually able to really start kind of getting things back to not even really normal, because it was nothing compared to right now. Like now we're at least outside, hanging out with people, but
we're
it was
in the same room together.
Exactly.
Right.
We would have been like, you would have been like over there, I would have been over here.
Masks.
Yeah, everything. So, very
yeah.
different. What were some of the things that you feel like you were able to accomplish during this time, during COVID?
Well, I think that, a lot of what the county's emergency response to the pandemic, it was, spearheaded by the county executive's office and the county health department. So as legislators, we took more of we were active in our own communities, getting resources and helping get, supplies and PPE and stuff like that. But like, the real, nuts and bolts of like the testing and, the vaccine administration. I mean, that was something that the county handled, largely through its executive department. But, we obviously had the role as legislators of, approving different measures. We were able to help extend the time period for property taxpayers to pay their property taxes. We've taken, smaller measures like that as in response to, other measures like that in response to COVID. But I think we've also had to continue to do the business of, of government in addition to the emergency aspects of it. And, a lot of, in addition to COVID, 3 months after COVID hit, we had, the murder of George Floyd, and then a whole wave of, police reform that really went across the country. And here in New York, we did a lot of work on that. As you know, we had the task force, the police reform task force. So I think that's probably one of the most significant things that I've been able to work on as a legislator, is helping to shepherd through that, the legislation that ultimately was enacted, adopting the police reform recommendations.
And you were chair of the Public Safety Committee at the time.
Yes,
right?
I was chair of the Board of Legislators Public Safety Committee. So we had a series of meetings to go through this process, and ultimately I was able to introduce the legislation on the floor, which was a very gratifying experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was in my first term, and now in my second term, I'm chairing the legislation committee. We've been doing a lot of legislation around things like pay equity and hate crimes and protecting access to abortion clinics. We're working on right to counsel bill legislation for tenants, across the county. So there's food allergy labels, gun safety warning labels. We've done a lot of legislation just this term alone. Yeah, it's been
successful.
Been busy, yeah.
Yeah, you guys definitely have been. So, for people who don't know, what does a county legislator do? You kind of gave us an idea of some of the work you do and what you're able to accomplish. But in your own words, what do you think this role entails?
Well, the primary role of the county legislature is to is to approve the annual budget, which in Westchester County is over $2 billion annually. Wow. Yeah. And the budget process is months long.
Yes.
And to exercise legislative oversight over all of the county's departments, to be a partner with the county executive, but a co-equal partner,
right,
co-equal branch of the county government, and to enact legislation.
Thank you. I hope that was helpful to a lot of folks, because I know sometimes government seems so like,
Yeah, it's like, what do they do
yeah, it's like I feel like I know sort of what
besides
you do.
fundraiser?
Exactly. Well, I'm glad that you were able to accomplish a lot of those things. We were working together for most of that time.
Yes, we were.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on.
Well, really, for all of that time.
Really, yeah.
A couple of weeks ago.
Exactly. And so that's why I'm here. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts were when we started having those conversations around police reform. There were a lot of, as maybe some of you may or may not know, some individuals do believe that, in very strong terms, defunding the police is something that they would have preferred to see, or just something of that nature. So I'm curious, like, what some of your thought process was regarding those conversations, because it's a lot to navigate, really. And as a county legislator, I'm sure that it can be very difficult to navigate those, very, very different perspectives on how they want to see things go. So, what were your initial feelings when people started protesting?
Well, I mean, I think that I was as much a part of those protests as anyone else, and I think that the conversation about reform was needing to take place.
Yeah.
And so I was happy to participate in those. Now, that doesn't mean that I agreed with, everything or everyone that, had a position or a platform,
Right.
with respect to this issue. When you talk specifically about, the conversation as it pertained to this idea of defunding the police, I think even that word in itself doesn't have one specific meaning. There's a range of what people mean when they use that. You had some who maybe quite literally would like to see, police defunded and disbanded. I don't think that would be wise under any circumstances. And then you had those who, when they say defund, they could just mean perhaps we spend a little less on policing and more on things like education and healthcare and so forth. Or maybe not even spending less, but just maybe reprioritizing how we spend. Whatever the meaning might be, I don't use the term defund because I find that it just it's too much of a charged term. And regardless of how you try and explain it, it raises as an elected official, I feel that it makes for it brings up conversations or challenges that I think we could be I could spend my time talking about or working on other things in a much more productive manner. So while I understand the concerns surrounding what we've seen in over the course of the last couple of decades, maybe with what has rightly been called the militarization of our police, and that those are real conversations that we have to have surrounding what are the types of equipment and sort of the hardware that our police are using or have access to, and how that ties into their ability, legitimately ties into their ability to do their job versus can create sort of these image problems when there's a perception that they are looking to sort of roll like like a tank battalion through the inner city areas.
Right.
And that's obviously something that I shouldn't say obviously, but that's something that I don't think we want our police to be viewed as a sort of an occupying force.
Right. So I'm curious if you think reform is possible, because it kind of leads to a larger conversation around whether reform is something that is even viable, or if it's really kind of just like a far-fetched dream, right? I'm of the opinion in some ways that reform is very possible, but I've definitely heard a lot of opinions, especially from more left Democrats, who believe that reform maybe is not always the right answer. So do you think reform is possible?
I think it's necessary. And so if it's necessary, then we have to make it possible.
I like that.
Because if we don't, take a look at these old methods or these old models of policing that are not, that are simultaneously not achieving the goals that they're intended to, and damaging or doing further harm to the community at the same time, then we need to address that. And so I think that reform in policing, whether you're talking about sort of that structural reform of chain of command, or whether you're talking about the types of reforms that diversifies the the police, our police forces, or you're talking about the an ideological reform where we want our if we want our police departments to view themselves more in terms of partners with the communities that they work in, that they serve, and less as sort of these occupying soldiers, right? I'm not a cop. I've never been a cop, so I don't profess to know what it's like to actually be on the job. Not all jobs are the same, right? Mm-hmm. Police in Greenwich don't have the same. Greenwich, Connecticut don't necessarily have the same, days that police in South Bronx do.
Yeah.
I have in my time as a prosecutor in the Bronx, I have done ride-alongs with the cops down there, and those are some busy areas, and you want police in places where there are things happening to people or things that are going on in the community that have to be checked, that have to be addressed by law enforcement. But I think if the model of policing that we're sending our police officers into the the proverbial wild west, and they're there just to sort of keep the peace. I think that that's just an old model that in different times was more widely accepted for a variety of reasons, but nowadays, with our prison system being the way that it is, our incarceratory system being as full of men and primarily men, but also women of color, at least proportionately, we have to really step back and take a look, and this doesn't even get to the discussion about violence.
Yeah.
And which of course George Floyd was the incident that sort of tipped off this whole most recent conversation about.
Yeah, and unfortunately, so many other cases came afterwards, after he was killed, and it really did lead to such a large conversation around is it possible to reform a system that continues to oppress certain types of peoples and groups. And so I think it's worth asking, especially because as an elected official, you represent the people of this area, but really are part of a larger system too, where you can really influence and do something. So thank you for answering that very honestly. I appreciate it. I'm sure the people do as well, because we need more of that, right? Having this kind of open conversation around what is possible, what is not. Not that things can't be possible, because I think if there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
But I'm sure that it's also been difficult for you to also have these more like open conversations with people who have opposing views, or maybe even police officers. I'm sure that hasn't been easy for you either.
Well, as a person of color, I feel I can identify with, one side of this equation, which is that, I could be that person. I could be that George Floyd, or, I could be that Walter Scott, or Tamir Rice, somebody who was, maybe I was breaking the law, but I certainly wasn't doing it in such a way that justified my life being taken.
I mean, we've seen people kill and shoot innocent individuals just in the past month, and it seems like those individuals never get reprimanded the same way that we've seen people of color get reprimanded.
Well, right. There's also that side of it as well, where the justice system tends to treat certain offenders differently. But I'm talking more about just as someone who's a potential victim in the street, just because of what I look like, because if I'm not wearing my suit, and if I don't have my my ID card on me saying that I'm a county legislator, and I'm driving around like anybody else at 12 o'clock at night, if you're making a quick run to the store with my hat down, or maybe a hoodie if it's cold, I could just as easily end up on the wrong side of that. And so I come at it from that perspective, but also as an elected official, and as somebody who believes in public safety, who believes that in society we have to have a degree of order in order for all of us to feel safe and to get on with our daily business. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want a situation where people who are engaged in criminal activity felt emboldened to do so when and where they wanted to without any fear of repercussion.
Yeah.
And so I understand the need for maintaining public safety. I think that we have to continue to have these conversations between law enforcement and the community, to continue to find ways that bridge the gap, so that there's less George Floyd's and less Tamir Rice's, and more instances where someone maybe who knew George Floyd or Tamir Rice could have showed up and said, "Hey man, either I got to take you in, or you're scaring people. You're out here like this, waving around what looks like a gun," because that just as easily could have been the case. And we want to see more of that. We're not gonna eliminate police related shootings. We're not going to eliminate that sort of thing, but we can hopefully get to a point where they occur less and less, and where our police departments and our law enforcement community is trained properly, so that they don't they're not bringing the sort of the preconceived notions and ideas to the situation as much based upon what race and so forth.
Yeah,
it's a tough thing, because we do expect our law enforcement agents, officers, to make good decisions under extreme circumstances.
Yeah,
where they have very short amount of time to. You can't expect somebody to get there and have to try and figure out what they're going to do. It's the training, I believe. Just like training for a marathon, or training for a boxing match or something. It's that training that gets you ready, so that by the time you're there, you're more likely to make the right decision.
So you think it's the training that maybe needs to change, or do you think there are other things that
that's a big
could
part
change?
Of it.
Yeah.
Well, training, we went through a pretty what's the word? Healthy, lengthy. That's the word. We went through a pretty lengthy process with our our police reform meetings or conversations, not only about training but about screening and recruiting. Right, we know that there's an inordinately terrifying amount of white supremacists and white supremacists, of law enforcement members who are influenced by white supremacist ideology, and you certainly have a right to believe whatever you want about whatever you want to believe it about. But if you want to take up a gun and a shield, then we need to know, what those beliefs are before we're giving you that gun and shield to go into a community where you're going to be encountering people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that. So I think screening and recruiting is just as important a component as the training is, whether it's the sensitivity, racial bias training, whether it's firearms training, all of those things combined are what's going to move us in the right direction.
In a better direction, hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I mean, I'm glad that this is something that you've also thought about. And I think just like you said, your personal perspective as well has helped to kind of navigate these conversations. You said that you, in many ways, you can see yourself potentially being on the other side. And I think that's important. And I think having that ability to see, like, let me put myself in this position, or let me see it from this way is really helpful. And so thank you for sharing that. More recently, as I'm sure that things have gotten really tense with regards to women's reproductive rights. So tell me about what it was like for you. You were in the middle of a campaign when this happened, but what were some of your thoughts when Roe v. Wade was overturned?
Wow, that was a very sad day.
Yeah.
Sad for women's reproductive rights, and a sad day, I think, for civil rights in general, because a scary day, rather, because the court indicated not only was it overturning 50 years of legal precedent, stare decisis, and overturning, or basically saying no, a woman does not have a fundamental right to choose, what she wants to do with her own body. But there were seeming to indicate that there were other rights that they're, ready to do away with as well. Perhaps the right to marry, right? Perhaps the interracial marriages. So I think that so I was very disheartened by that, and of course participated in a couple of the local demonstrations against it. And also was able to get, working with my colleagues on the Board of Legislators, get legislation passed that would, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to...
We're going to have to cut it short soon, but we'll have you back.
Can we do,
yeah, we can definitely have you back.
We can do a part 2.
Yes.
But we were able to get legislation passed here in Westchester. It's not the first of its kind, but probably goes the furthest in terms of protecting access to abortion clinics here in Westchester by making it illegal to come within a certain distance of the entranceways, or even people going to and from those clinics, using those facilities,
right?
Reproductive healthcare facilities, from protecting them from being, accosted or harassed by someone who's there clearly to make a political point.
Right. All right. Well, thank you for being able to have this conversation with me. To wrap it all up, put a little bow on it. I would like to know, just moving forward, what is your vision really for your position as a county legislator with the power that you have, but just as an individual, what is your position Or what are your thoughts like moving forward? What would you like to see change? What matters the most to you?
Well, I think that I'd like to see on the county legislature, I think we have a very diverse board, diverse by gender, as well as diverse in terms of ethnicity or race, with the exception of the Spanish-speaking population who are not represented very well at all on our board because of the 17 legislators. There's only one who is of Latinx origin, and I would like to see that change in terms of there being more representation. As far as where I see myself in the future, I'll be a county legislator as long as people will continue to elect me, and will continue to work on passing legislation that is empowering, that whether it's related to healthcare, whether it's related to diversity, whether it's whatever the case might, safety, gun safety, to do to just make Westchester a safer and a more welcoming place for everyone, because that's the Westchester that I've grown up in, and I want to see that expand even more for the people who are going to come after us.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. Where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on social media. Colin D. Smith is my Facebook account. I'm also on Instagram at Colin for Westchester. And I think the same for Twitter, but I'm not sure. But yeah, and if you go to the Westchester County website, Westchester County Board of Legislators website, you'll find me as the legislator under District 1.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
I'm sure that you will be back.
I look forward to it.
And until next time, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in, who listened to our conversation. If you guys have any questions or would like to reach out with any questions, I'm happy to answer. Leave a comment or just reach out to me. I'm happy to help. And thank you again, Colin.
Thank you.
This is always Amy, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.